different way to educate children. It's all based on what she observed children actually doing. So it's kind of like the way our lesson plans in Montessori are living documents. They change based on what we see the children doing. This whole educational philosophy is a living thing because it changes according to what we actually see children doing. Okay, so before we go over these principles of Montessori, I want to go back. I'd like to go back for a minute and share the Mentimeter again. And after hearing a little bit about what she did, I want to reset. And I want to give you another minute to put in, you'll use the same code. And I hope this will work. Otherwise, I might have to reset. I might have to just refresh my screen. But I'd like you to put in the words that you think of specifically about Dr. Montessori. Some of them may be the same. Some of them may be different. I'm going to refresh my screen just to see if it'll give us a new one. All right, you should be able to use the same code and start again. Are you able to put anything in?
I put something
No.
in. I think it's
Okay.
showing. Yeah.
Okay, let's see.
It says voting is closed.
Okay, let me change that. Proceed to open voting. Okay, now try. Let's see if that worked. Yep. All right, so I see scientific, pioneer, brave, fearless, driven, individualist, observation, yes, learning, particularly like fearless. I think that describes her quite a bit. There are stories of how when she was in the Medical College of Rome, because she was a woman, she wasn't allowed to participate in the cadaver studies that at the same time as the men, because it wasn't considered proper. And so she had to go in at night by herself and do all of the dissections necessary for her degree. And fearless definitely describes what you would need to be able to do something like that. I don't know that I could. Definitely driven, headstrong, yes, radical, absolutely. All right. Okay, so I think we can do a history. So this was what we started with. And this shows a lot of words specific to Montessori, I think Montessori philosophy and Montessori method, what you know about classrooms, Montessori classrooms and Montessori schools. And the other, I think, is a little more specific to Maria Montessori. And I think it's important to be able to separate the idea of Maria Montessori and the philosophy, and really understand who she was and how she came to create this philosophy in order to really be able to understand what it is that we're trying to do. That scientific background, that new approach to looking at children and meeting the specific needs of the children in front of you, as opposed to just having a more general idea of children and expecting the children to fit in to your expectations. Maria Montessori turned to that inside out. And she expected people to look at the children that were in front of them and to make sure that they were serving those children particularly. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you for sharing that with me, and it was my first experience with that. Okay, so these principles of Montessori that you would expect to find in any Montessori classroom are organized by me according to the ones that I felt were most important. However, it's really hard to choose because they all come together to make an authentic Montessori classroom. And so you really can't have, you can't just do one or maybe two and have a real Montessori classroom. Montessori is not a patented name. Anyone can call themselves a Montessori school, even if they don't really have much out that involves Montessori materials, or if they don't have trained teachers. And so it's really important that the school that you're at, like at Twin Parks, you know, that the administration is looking at making sure that the teachers are trained, they understand Montessori, they understand who she was and the philosophy, so that you can provide the children with an authentic Montessori experience. So here are the tenets. The first being respect for the child. Then we're going to talk about following the child. And you may have heard some of these terms before, they may be new, but we'll go over them. The sensitive periods, the prepared environment. All right, so we're going to start with respect for the child. There isn't much I'm going to read to you, but this one I do want to read to you. This is a quote from Dr. Maria Montessori back in 1965. And she wrote, "As a rule, however, we do not respect children. We try to force them to follow us without regard to their special needs. We are overbearing with them, and above all, rude. And then we expect them to be submissive and well-behaved, knowing all the time how strong is their instinct of imitation and how touching their faith in and admiration of us. They will imitate us in any case. Let us treat them, therefore, with all the kindness which we would wish to help to develop in them." So this was written many, many years ago, but it is very true today as well. Schedules are busy, parents feel rushed, and children are often the ones that suffer. So our classrooms are a safe place for children to learn not only academics, but who they are as human beings, for them to feel tremendous respect from adults as well as from other children, and to be able to take those risks that will allow them to grow. So respect is very, very important. So how do we show respect for the child? And I'm going to give you kind of a, for lack of a better word, a snarky answer. How do we show respect for them? We respect them. And I know it's not that simple, but in some ways it is. You know, in order to show respect for the child, we have to genuinely respect them. Children are able to see through any fake behavior that an adult puts on. They see right through that. And if you are not, or an adult is with a child and they're not really showing respect, the child knows it. And so the most important thing that we can do is to enter into our classrooms every day full of respect for the children. And now we'll talk about how we show that respect. So this is a large list. Most of it, however, I feel is common sense. It's how we would want to be treated ourselves, and it's how we would treat other adults. So we show respect for the children by avoiding interrupting them when they're busy at work. Even something that does not feel or seem important to us can be very important to the child. So we don't just assume if a child is sitting and maybe out in the grass and playing with the grass and is really focused. We don't assume that they're not doing anything or that what they're doing is unimportant and bring them over to something else. We show respect for anything that captures their interest, as long as it follows, you know, being safe, being respectful of each other and the environment. You know, then we allow them to focus on the things that are of interest to them. So we try not to interrupt them. We provide them with large blocks of time that they can explore the materials in the classroom without interrupting. So unlike a more traditional program that has, you know, 10 minutes for this, and then we do a group project that might take 15 minutes, and then we sit at circle and we sing a song, and then we go do this, where the whole class is moving together through activities, we give blocks of time that the children can choose independent activities, and they can move from place to place, and they're not constantly stopped. We don't help children unnecessarily with things that they can do for themselves. When we do that, we're not meaning to, but we're telling the child that we don't feel that they're capable. So whenever possible, we allow the children to do things for themselves. That's why our classrooms are set up to allow for independence. We have tools for cleaning up spills. We have small cups that the children can use to get themselves drinks. We have snack areas that are set up so that the children can serve themselves snack with a little bit of assistance, depending on the age in the classroom. So we're not doing things for children that they can do for themselves. But we do provide assistance if the child is frustrated. And sometimes a child will be able to do something one day, and then the next day they perhaps are a bit tired, or they've had a rough start to the day, and they may be asking for help with something that they typically can do. It's okay to offer a little bit of assistance on in those moments when they just need a little boost, but we do as little as possible. So for example, with zipping up a coat, it might be as small as pointing to the space where that little metal piece has to go for them to zip up the coat. Or it might be a little bit more directive where we're holding the child's hand and helping them to guide that piece into the right space. But we only do that little bit that gets them back on track, and then we step back until we're needed again. We offer children choices, always choices that no matter what they choose is acceptable. So things like, instead of saying to a child, we're going outside, would you like to put on your shoes? They have to have their shoes on to go outside. So the choice instead is, would you like to start with your left foot or your right foot? Or would you like to put your shoes on first or your coat on first? So we give choices where no matter what the child chooses, it's okay. And we try to avoid situations where we offer them a choice that we're not willing to follow through on. We make ourselves available for the child when they need us. We don't, Montessori teachers often look like they aren't busy. That's because we're waiting for the moment that we're needed. So we're not flipping through phones or, doing lesson plans and things. We are just waiting until the child needs us so that we are available. When they have conversations with us, we listen to them without imposing our own thoughts. So our conversations are back and forth with the children, but they're real conversations. We're not just paying lip service to the child when they want to share something with us because we have something else to do. So if a child comes over and wants to tell us, I got a new dog, it's not, oh, that's nice, and then we move on. It's, oh, that sounds very exciting. Would you like to tell me a little bit more about the dog? And give them a chance to engage in that conversation. And if we can't have a conversation with the child at that moment, if we are on our way somewhere, someone needs us in the bathroom or something, then we can say to the child, I would love to hear more about your new dog, but Sophie is waiting for me in the bathroom and I must go. But I'll come back and I'll let you know when you can have my full attention. We show interest in their thoughts. Anyone who's been around children, from between the ages of birth to 6, knows that their thoughts are fascinating. I really enjoy speaking with children and hearing how they perceive the world and what they think about things. And it's one of my favorite things to do, to listen to children. We allow them to experience the feelings that they're having. Too often, adults tell children, you're fine, when the child isn't feeling fine. So if a child is crying, we don't say, oh, you're okay, because the child is experiencing that feeling of sadness or frustration or anger. And when we tell them that they're okay, they're getting a very mixed message. They're hearing one thing from outside, but then they're feeling something very different internally. So instead, we can say things to children like, you are safe. I will stay with you until you feel better. We can give words to how they're feeling. I see that you are crying. You maybe are feeling sad, or I'm wondering if maybe you're feeling frustrated or You might be feeling angry, so we can give them words. We can let them know that it will be okay, that we will help them figure out a solution to the problem, but we don't negate their feelings by telling them that they're okay when they're not. So they are allowed to feel sad. They're allowed to feel angry. They're allowed to feel frustrated or scared. The behaviors that are acceptable when they're feeling, different ways, those we might have to help them modify. It's okay to feel angry, but it's not okay to punch someone because you're angry. So we show them that difference, but we do allow them to experience those feelings, whatever they are. When they ask us questions, we turn them back to them. We know a lot of those answers, but we don't have to give them. It's for a child to discover things on their own is very joyful, and we don't want to take that away. So we can point them in the direction of a resource like a book or another student. I know the names of all the dinosaurs after working for 26 years in a 3 to 6 classroom. However, if a child asks me the name of a dinosaur, I don't tell them. I send them to one of the child dinosaur experts in the classroom, and I have them ask that child, because it isn't about us. So we want to turn those questions back to the child. How might you find that out? What resource would we need in order to find the answer to that question? Who could you ask? Things like that. And we provide materials and supplies and resources to make sure that they can do the work that they're called to do and that they can answer the questions that they have. Basically, we afford them the same respect we would give to any other human being, regardless of age. So just because the children are smaller than us and have less life experience doesn't mean that they are deserving of less respect. So that is a huge part of Montessori. And I wanted to tell a little story. I know Susan's heard this a few times, but it's one of my favorite stories. So, and it talks about how in Montessori, we don't expect children to be a certain way. And in a lot of traditional programs, hopefully less and less as time goes on, but in a lot of traditional programs, children are expected to fit the model that the teachers expect and behave a certain way. And so about over 10 years ago, about 12 years or so ago, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine on the phone who was a special education teacher in Connecticut, I believe. And we were talking about trying to fit the square peg into the round hole, the expression of like trying to make sure that a child who maybe didn't quite fit in, that they were trying to change them so that they could then fit. And while I'm having this conversation, my youngest, who was probably about 2, had Play-Doh all over the table. And she was taking all the tools and she was just kind of smashing them in so that they stood up. She had kind of like a forest of Play-Doh tools. And Ren, my oldest, was, reading a book and kind of, I guess, half listening to the conversation. I didn't realize at the time, but also watching their little sister play. And about a half an hour after the conversation was over, I was making dinner and Ren came in and said, "Mama, Montessori is Play-Doh." I said, "Okay, I would like a little more information. What do you mean?" And Ren said, "Montessori is Play-Doh because it doesn't matter what shape you are. It just surrounds you and holds you up." And I thought, how cool is that my 7-year-old was able to know that about their educational, their school, because Ren had been always in a place where they were listened to, they were respected, their thoughts were heard. And Ren is not the typical shape, was not the typical shape of a child, is not the typical young adult, but they fit in beautifully in Play-Doh, and in Montessori. And I just thought that was a neat thing for Ren to recognize even at that early age. And Montessori is Play-Doh. It doesn't matter who the children are. Our job is to meet them where they are, support them with whatever they need, and bring them to the next level in any academic, social, emotional skills that they're learning. So just remember, Montessori is Play-Doh. All right, so moving on from respect, another Montessori principle is to follow the child. So Montessorians believe that each child has an inner guide within them that brings them to the work that they are meant to be learning at the time that they're meant to be learning it. So if you think about a young child that's learning to walk, nobody has to say, okay, it's time to cruise. It's time to pull up and stand up. Okay, now we're going to spend 15 minutes walking along the couch. Children are just drawn to those behaviors. They pull up, they cruise along furniture, they sit down, they fall, they pull themselves back up again. They'll hold onto fingers and try walking across the floor. They are drawn to practice the skill that they are ready for at that moment. A child who's learning to speak is babbling all the time, is looking for interactions with adults and other children, and babbling a little bit and then waiting for for someone else to talk, and then back and forth. And nobody has to tell them it's time to start talking. It's time to use your voice. They have an inner guide that calls them to do the things that they need in order to learn what they need to learn. And that doesn't stop with walking, and it doesn't stop with talking. It's there for learning to read, for learning to write, for learning math skills, for learning social and emotional behaviors, grace and courtesy lessons. The children are drawn to the materials and the activities that will allow them to learn what they're ready to learn. So if the adult wants to be meeting the needs of the child, we have to follow what they're telling us. So that begins with teacher observation. Observation is huge in Montessori. If we're not watching what the children are doing, then we can't know what materials to be introducing to them, or we don't know when they're ready for the next step, or if they're having difficulty with something. And so teachers observe the children to get an idea of what materials are calling to them, what lessons to give, what to repeat if they're having difficulty with something. But also we look for things that maybe are missing in our classroom. So if a child is using a material in a way that it's not intended, it might give us a clue as to something that should be in the classroom that isn't there at that moment. So observation provides us with a great deal of information. We also trust that the children are going to show us what it is that they need to learn. And that can be challenging when you're new to Montessori. It can also be challenging as a parent. I experienced that with my oldest when they were in Montessori early childhood classroom. They were one of the children that never ever wanted to do sandpaper letters. And they never wanted to do any lessons with sound work or anything like that. And I remember the summer before Ren's kindergarten year, I remember chanting to myself, you believe in this method, you believe in this method, you believe in this method. You've been doing this for a number of years. This, it will be okay, it will be okay, it will be okay. Because I worried. As a parent, I started to worry. And 2 weeks before the school year started, I had brought home all the Bob books to repair. And so I'm taping them all up, and Ren picks one up and reads it. And then picks up the next one and reads it. And then, Mama, can I take this basket? Went into the next room and read through them all. I'm like, okay, I got it. I got the message. We have to trust. Ren just wasn't someone that wanted to participate in the lessons, but had been watching. So we have to believe in the children that we have. We have to trust that as long as we provide them with the right environment, that we are open to giving them the lessons that they're called to, that they will move through this program. Which leads us to being that parent advocate, or the advocate for the children when the child's path doesn't necessarily follow what the parent hopes for. And sometimes that happens. I've had parents of 3-year-olds write on their getting to know you form what they would like their children to learn. And this is a child that maybe just turned 3 and they want them to learn to read, or they want them to do addition or subtraction. And the child is just not ready for that. So we trust the children, and it becomes our job to help advocate for them with parents when those expectations don't quite match up. And to help the parent to see the beauty of allowing their child to go through their own development at their own pace, and to trust that we're keeping an eye on things. Sometimes children don't follow the typical path because there is a problem or there's something they're struggling with. And we do watch for that. And we want the parents to trust us that we will let them know if there is a problem. But we are advocating for the child that is following their own path. And the parents maybe have too high expectations or too low expectations. They're not expecting the child to do things independently for themselves when the child is capable. So it can go either way. But our job is to be an advocate for each of the children in our classrooms and make sure that they are supported both at home and at school. All right. Another principle, which kind of follows from that, when we talk about the children going through different their own path of development, we also talk about something that Maria Montessori termed the sensitive periods. So the sensitive periods are periods of time when the child is primed to learn something. And there are many different sensitive periods for children. I am most familiar with the ones that come up in 3 to 6 because that's where my expertise comes in. But there are sensitive periods from birth all the way up through, I believe at least through into adulthood. There are sensitive periods for in elementary and middle school for things like social justice and independence. When children are little, we have the sensitive periods for learning to walk, for learning to talk, for learning, a sensitive period for small things, where they're very, very interested in the tiniest of things. Children go through a sensitive period for movement that is quite a long period that starts with moving their bodies in, grasping when they're infants into running as they are, 3, 4, and 5 years old. So when a sensitive period is happening, it is the easiest time for a child to learn that particular skill. They learn it, with ease, as long as they're provided with the opportunity to practice and the materials that they might need. Children follow a general timeline of these sensitive periods. The sensitive period for learning to walk generally comes before the sensitive period for learning to run or for learning to read, but they don't necessarily follow them at exactly the same moment. Every child isn't going to go start a sensitive period for learning to talk at exactly, 6 months, or, it will vary a little bit child to child. They will go through the general timeline in approximately the same order, but at their own pace. And our job is to observe, again, back to observation, and notice what the children are attracted to and focused on, and then make sure that we're meeting the needs of the sensitive periods that they're in. So we're recognizing these windows of opportunity for what they are, a chance for the children to gain skills quickly, easily, without a lot of fuss. And so we provide everything that they need. In most cases, it's the opportunity to practice without interruption. If a sensitive period is missed, it doesn't mean that a child can't learn that skill, but it does often mean that it will take more effort for them to learn it, and it will take more time. It will be more difficult. And you may have seen that with children who are in the sensitive period for toilet learning. If it's delayed too long, it can be quite a process for children to learn to use the bathroom successfully without accidents, because that period has been missed. So we want to make sure that we miss as little as possible. Some examples of sensitive periods: learning language, walking, fine motor development, reading, writing, etc. Okay. I want to stop for a minute because I feel like I've thrown a lot of information at you. Before we move on to any of the other principles of Montessori, does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far, either the sensitive periods or about following the child or respect for the child? And if you want to put it in chat as opposed to unmuting, that's fine too. Susan will let us know if there's anything in the chat. Okay. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the prepared environment. So this is not a picture of my classroom. This is a picture of a Montessori classroom somewhere that I found online. So when we're setting up the prepared environment, our job is to make sure that our classroom meets the needs of the children that are currently enrolled. And this is another example that Montessori classrooms are different than traditional classrooms. In a traditional classroom, it typically looks the same every year. And the teachers follow the same calendar or plan each year. So they know already what they're going to be teaching on October 15th, or they know what unit they're going to be studying in January. And in a Montessori classroom, each year it's going to look a little bit different. From month to month, it's going to look different because the needs of the children are going to change as they develop. And so we put out in our classroom only what the children need at that moment. If something is not being used, then it's removed and something else is put in its place that better meets the needs of the children. In my training, they talked about, if it collects dust, it's time to put it away and put out something else, or put out a variation of something so that the children have renewed interest. And before I automatically put something away, though, I do like to check to make sure that the children have noticed the material. It may not being used, may not be being used because nobody has noticed it. So before I take something away, I will either give that material as a lesson to a child that I think is ready for it, or I might just do it myself in an area that has a number of children to see if that sparks some interest. But if not, then it's time to put that work away. And it may come out a few months later and be used every day, all day long. It just depends on what the children need at that moment. If a child needs a material, even if just one child needs something, it should be out. And so if there's one child in the classroom in a kindergarten classroom that needs to work on tying their shoes, then those materials should be available. There might not be anyone that uses it effectively, but if one child needs it, it should be there. Our classrooms are beautiful spaces. You probably can't see too much of my classroom because of where I'm sitting. I'm going to try to turn it around a little. So I want you to notice there, and I'm sure you see this in your own classroom, there are a few pieces of art or things for the children, but they're low at the child's level, and it's not overly busy. You can see there's a little picture of, here, let me stop for a minute so you can see this a little bit better. So we have right here, this is actually a series of pictures that a parent took from a field trip, and you can't see it, of course, but the children are far away, and it's like a series. The children were running closer and closer to me. So by the final picture, the children have reached me. So it's sweet, and it has some meaning. Let's see. So we've got a 3-part card work here that became art. This is our only large piece of art that was made by students several years ago. You can see there's little bits to make the room interesting, but not overdone. So. And we have a few more things to put up on the walls. We're not quite finished, but the space should be beautiful. It should be simple. The materials inside should be natural materials. So made of wood or metal, ceramics, things that we don't tend to see a lot of plastic in classrooms unless it's to do with regulations. And I know sometimes there are different regulations for different companies or different organizations that oversee schools, and sometimes you're not allowed to have ceramics, you're not allowed to have things that are breakable or glass, in which case you would have to use more non-breakable things, metals or wood or plastic. But we try to pick things that are as beautiful and natural as possible for the children. We use simple and meaningful decorations. You won't see big posters of cartoons telling children to be quiet, or, you know, we're quiet and we raise our hand, or all of those little sayings that you might see in a more traditional program. The classrooms look like homes. And they're organized for use by the children. So our classrooms have the materials that the children need on a regular basis are down low so that they can reach them. The shelves are available, filled with the work that the children can choose. If I find that children are often asking me for something, then it means that's something that probably should come out onto the shelf or onto a supply shelf. For example, the first couple of years I taught, I was very protective of tape, Scotch tape. I'm not sure why, but I was very protective of it. And so I had it in the cabinet. And whenever a child needed a piece of tape, they had to come and get me, and I had to go and get the tape dispenser and give them a piece, and so forth. And after a while, I realized that a large part of my day was spent in getting tape for children. And it seemed like perhaps that was not the most important thing for me to be doing. And so we brought out the tape. We gave a lesson in how to use the tape dispenser. We wanted to give the children a chance to be successful. And we talked as a class about how much tape we thought we should use for things. And the children, you know, I guided the discussion, but the children had the discussion, and they decided that they should measure with their fingers how long they needed. And then they should use those fingers to kind of take that much tape. You know, and if they didn't take quite enough, they could go back for more and that kind of thing. So they worked it all out. And from then on, the tape dispenser has been available to the children. And we do have those discussions regularly so that new children learn how to use them. So the things that the children need should be available to them. And it's arranged so the children can move freely throughout the room. So we don't want to be blocking parts of the room for children. You know, we have the ability in my school to go to an outside space. So when the door is open, the children can move freely in and out. But when the door is closed, that means the outside space is not available. And it's okay to block off things like that. You know, for today is a really rainy day, we weren't going to go outside. So that's a little different. That's keeping everyone inside where it's dry, and we don't really have anything in our outside space right now because of the rain. But we want to make sure that the children have the ability to go and get a drink when they need it, to get a snack when they need it, to go and use the bathroom when they need to put things in their cubby if they finish a work that they want to bring home, or to go get something out of their bag. So we set up the environment so the children are able to access everything that they need to during the day. Okay. Just going to check my notes and make sure I didn't miss anything about the prepared and So those are the principles and the beliefs of Montessori education that help us to set up our classroom, help us to know how we interact with children. The rest of this presentation, I want to talk about the role of the adult and what it means to be a teacher in a classroom, in a Montessori classroom. What do the lead teachers do? What do the assistant teachers do? How do we handle classroom management? Things like that. So the first piece is a lot of philosophy. I want to take maybe a 5-10 minute break to let people get a drink, go to the bathroom, if anything that they need, and then come back and focus on the adult. So it is 2:50, about 2:55, I think right now. If you could take that break, stretch, and come back at 3:05, then we can go into the role of the adults for the rest of this workshop. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
One thing, I'm reading this book called
Yeah.
Bringing Up Bebe.
Yep.
And it's it's a woman who's a journalist, and she goes to Paris, and she notices the French are sitting at the table and their toddlers are sitting there eating nicely. And she goes, like in the US, it's, kids are tearing up napkin sugar packets and calamari and everything's everywhere. And she's like, what is it that's going on with the French that, and so she started studying. And one thing, there's so many similarities to Montessori.
Yeah.
And one of them is the idea of waiting a little bit. And I noticed, like, for, the toddler, how the children, we have a tasting activity and the children are all expected to wait. And that activity of just waiting a little bit, to not necessarily giving into what we want every minute at all times, is such a powerful thing for children, that Montessori has already in its philosophy. It's not, I don't know that we actually talk a lot about it, but we do it all the time. So, like, for instance, the whole idea of, when you want my attention, I'm not going to defer my attention from what I'm doing right now just to pay attention to you immediately, but I am going to acknowledge that you're here and then give you the time to sit and wait till I can attend to you. It's not all about that we serve the child, we respect the child, but we want to teach them also the value of just waiting a little bit. And then and sitting down at the table and enjoying a meal and having all of the food groups. And it's not just going to be white pasta because that's the only thing you'll eat, supposedly. It's going to be introducing new foods and allowing them the opportunity to savor and to enjoy table conversations, maybe some soft music and flowers on the table and those kind of things. So I'm only like about halfway through the book, but it's really been fascinating.
Yeah. It does sound like a lot of it reminds our lunchtime, in Ashley's in my classroom at lunchtime, we play classical music. We have the lights dimmed. Some years the children ask for candles and we have the ones that flicker, but they're not like real flames.
Mhm.
And so there's a candle at each table. And that's how we have lunch every day.
Yeah. And I mean, I know for the infants, like, they put them on schedules sort of, and I guess with the French, the way they're describing it is, and I know it's not all French people, but this general philosophy, and she goes into detail about some of the philosophers that, and the psychologists that have done this, but they kind of lead them towards the schedule that you would have when you are an adult, that you're going to have your 3 meals a day, that you're not going to snack a lot in between meals, that, the idea that when grandma said, don't eat, you're going to spoil your dinner, that's really what they meant, to withhold, you're a little bit hungry, well, to kind of distract yourself, and because snack time it's not time for snack yet, or it's not time for lunch yet, we're going to have to wait a little bit. And that whole self-discipline that we help children to develop by delaying some gratification. And it's not just all about the instant gratification that we, in our culture, sometimes we take for granted, and it's not necessarily a given. We can, we can wait for things, and it is good for us to wait for things.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
I
I'm
want
going to just grab
take a rest too. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm just going to go get a little glass of water just to make sure that I can make it through the rest. So I'm going to pop over and do that, but we'll start again in about 5 minutes or so.
Great, thank you. Is Michelle out this week or?
No, well, she was here all of last week. I kind of hope she's taking some time off
Yeah.
this week. I haven't seen her today. So I'm hopeful. Yeah, I feel like it probably hit her this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a certain amount of distraction that happens when you're working, but still.
Yeah, definitely. He's the only half day, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Jen. Oh, do you hear me?
Yep.
Oh,
How's it
hey,
going?
sorry. Let me see. Oh, you were muted on mine. Okay. Are you in you're in your classroom in Albany, right?
I am, yeah.
How's it been? You met your 3-year-olds today?
We had our threes today and they were very energetic.
How many 3s do you have?
I only have 6 this year. And we only
Okay.
had 5 come today because one of them had a cough. I only have one that came from our toddler program, and you could definitely see the difference. Usually we have a few in each classroom, a few that do and a few that don't, but we only had one, and she was on it. You know, she's like going from work to work and putting things down, and the others are kind of like spinning around, and it was just so much fun. And then we have one little boy that I think is going to be, I think I told a story at training about a little boy that never let me give him a lesson. And I ended up having to be very creative and do works near him and everything. And I think I have another one.
Oh, I kind of remember
So
you saying
he
that.
came in
Yeah.
and he was, he was watching what we were doing, but he had a very strong, I got a very strong vibe of, you will not tell me anything from this little guy.
Wants to
So
watch.
he was kind of watching from afar, but he came in and he had 2 or 3 Band-Aids stuck in his hair that were very clearly there purposefully. They were, and he had one on his arm and then one on a part of his pants and everything. And Ashley said something and he was, almost offended that I put that there, that's decoration.
Oh.
So I'm like, oh, he's going to be a pip. So,
He's got a personality.
yes, I love that. I love seeing all those personalities.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Have you guys started with your children yet?
We just met, at least my classroom, we met our pre-K kids, so they're 4, and we had about 6 come in today. And what about you?
For us, we have 10. We met some, during Zoom. We saw them. Looks fine. They are good napper. They nap good. They have a good food lovers. So that is perfect. They nap like 2 hours. Some other kids have different schedule for nap than ours, but we work with that.
And then you're in the young toddler room, right?
Yes, younger. We have 14. We have like few kids, 14 months old. The older son, one is 20 years, months. I'm sorry, months.
That's nice. I was telling Susan earlier, my dream when I retire from 3 to 6 is to be an infant teacher and be in the infant room. Not so much child. I feel like I move too quickly for toddlers. I feel like I would send them like flying accidentally, but I think I can slow myself down for infants.
I think Lee Sam said the same thing, that she wants to retire and work with the infants. And I wonder it seems like that would be more work, but I don't really know
different.
I
think because for me, I have more experience with pre-K from age 3 to 6. So this will be my first year that I'm working with infant. I don't know. I have experience, but I don't have so much, like 3 months, maybe 4.
Yeah.
But still, I don't know. It's a little bit challenging, but still.
I think what appeals to me about the infants is that you're moving from, you are certainly affecting the infants' lives, but you're moving from educating, in some ways, you're moving from educating the child to educating the parents and guiding the parent. And for me, that's very appealing. You're serving the needs of the infant, but you're educating the parent. And I feel like at that point in my career, I would want to move in that direction. I'm not sure. These are just early thoughts. All right. So
I guess
why don't So why don't we go and talk a little bit more about the role of the adult in the classroom? So if those of you who finished your break can pop your cameras back on, it's so much more appealing to talk to faces. And I'm going to share my screen again. So I divided this into 3 parts, although I know that Susan was talking about, you have a little more often co-teacher situations in the classroom. But I wanted to go over generally expectations of all adults who are in the classroom, things that we would want every adult who's in a Montessori classroom, ways that we would want them to behave. And then typical characteristics or jobs of a role of a head teacher and an assistant teacher. So for all adults in a Montessori classroom, so moving into a Montessori classroom can be a very humbling experience. If you have not been in a Montessori classroom before, particularly if you've been in a more traditional program, a lot of times in traditional programs, the focus is on the adult. And the adult is responsible for, kind of standing in front of everyone and, doling out the knowledge. And so you are the center of attention. And in a Montessori classroom, that's not the case. In fact, a lot of times when you walk into a Montessori classroom, it can be difficult to find the lead teacher or the assistant teacher, the adults, because they are sitting with a child giving a lesson, or they are crouching down to a child's level and having a conversation. They are not the center of the classroom They're not the center of attention. So it can be very humbling. For me, it feels like a tremendous relief to be able to step back and really be in the child's world and exist where they are. It feels, I feel very fortunate to be able to do that, but it is something where we step back and we let the children lead. We also want to be very present in the classroom. So that's also something that I cherish about the Montessori classroom. No matter what's going on in my life outside of work, when I walk into the classroom, I am here and nothing else matters but the children and my relationship with the children and how I connect them to the environment and their learning. That is the entire focus. And I can leave any worries or any stress or anything about my outside life outside. And I love that. In my career as a Montessorian, I have been pregnant with 2 children. I have gone through a divorce. I have lost a parent. There are so many experiences that happened in my life outside while I was a teacher. And I always found that being able to walk into the classroom and leave that at the door and really exist in this microcosm of our classroom was very freeing. And it allowed me to better process what was going on outside. You know, it kind of gave me a break. And so I was better able to deal with what was going on in my outside life outside. So it's something that, that we do need to be aware of. Children will pick up on negative emotions or, you know, or stresses that we have. They will feel that energy. And so we do have to shed it like a coat and leave it at the door. When I was listening to the workshop from Jonathan Wolf on Friday, he was telling a story about a student in, I think it was one of his early years, and he, you know, still remembered her full name, first and last. And I guess he was going through the classroom and she came up and she's, you know, kind of calls him over and tells him he was very crabby and grumpy that day, you know, and everything. And he was like, oh, thank you very much, you know, whatever. And he, you know, kind of brushed her off and kept moving. And she gave him a few more minutes. And then she called him over again, tugged on his sleeve. She's like, you are still very crabby and moody. I think you should go take a nap. And, you know, that children recognize those things and they have pretty logical solutions for them. They know when they're cranky, they go take a nap or have a snack. And so we want to be giving the children our best. And part of that is being able to come in fresh. And there are times that something happens and we need a moment. And, you know, I've had that happen where something has, you know, I've had a phone call, a difficult phone call, maybe during my lunch break or something. And I've had to go and ask someone to step into my classroom for a minute so I can just take 5 minutes to bring myself back to the place I need to be for children and then step in. So, you know, it does sometimes happen during the day where we need to kind of tag someone in for 5 minutes or so, step out into the hallway, gather ourselves and come back in. But for the most part, we want to leave all of that outside. So I work with my best friend. I'm very fortunate, and we didn't start off as best friends when she came into the classroom, but she has quickly become my best friend. I work with Ashley. And for someone I spend an extraordinary amount of every day with, we do all of our talking or texting in the evenings or on the weekends. Because when we're in the classroom together, we have a focus for the children. You know, that is our job. And it doesn't matter, you know, if I have something else I want to tell her or, you know, that we want to talk about, you know, it doesn't happen in the classroom. Those adult conversations are meant to be away from children's ears in most cases, because this is their world, not ours. And because we do need to be fully present for them. And so, you know, I used to joke with with my mother about, she would say, you know, you're with Ashley all day. How come you need to talk in the evenings? Because we don't get to talk during the day because we're focused on the children. And we've worked together long enough that we can communicate with just eye contact. But even that is, you know, I'll look over at her, catch her eye, and look over to a section of the classroom, and she knows that she needs to go over there maybe to be close by in case something's brewing, or maybe it's just something really sweet that's happening and I want her to notice, you know. So we have all these little looks, and we can send each other to different parts of the classroom, or we can walk by and you know, 2 or 3 words and know what the other person needs us to do or where we need to go. But other than that, we don't really talk in the classroom because that's not what we're here for. I have a lot of adult-child conversations during the day, though, many conversations. Something else that's really important for the adults in a Montessori classroom, and this is something I always laugh about because every single evaluation I had with Susan reminded me to do this because it's something I'm not particularly good at, was to nurture your own spirit and to find that balance. So in order to leave outside, in order to be able to be humble and fade into the background for the children, in order to be able to limit those adult conversations and not feel like you need to talk to the adults in your classroom, is to take care of yourself. And if those things aren't happening, then it's much harder to leave your outside life outside. It's much harder not to vent or share with the adult that you're working with. It's really important that we find the things that bring us joy and that bring us peace and that relieve our stress, whether that be meditation or yoga or journaling, whether it's exercise or knitting or reading. Whatever brings our spirit peace is something that needs to be a big part of our lives so that we can do the things that we need to in the classroom. Being a teacher is not a job that gets left when you go home every night. I mean, it just isn't. You know, I'll be in the shower and I'll think of something that I want to do with a child because of that moment of peace and quiet, and something will occur to me. Or, you know, I'll be getting ready to go to bed and an idea will come and I'll scribble it on a little notepad next to the bed that I keep. Because the children and the classrooms are often stay on our minds. However, it is important that we make sure that we find that balance and we're not so focused on the classroom and the children that we're not taking care of ourselves. So nurturing your own spirit is part of the transformation of the adult that Maria Montessori talks about, that it's not just about being the best teacher that you can be, but about being the best human being that you can be and being a whole human being, not someone who is so focused on the classroom that you're a workaholic, okay? We also, every adult in a Montessori classroom is a role model for the children. As it said in the quote, they will imitate us in any case, and they will, whatever we do. And so while I do tend to be a louder, bigger personality outside of the classroom, in the classroom, I need to be softer. I need to speak slower. I need to move slower. I need to make sure that anything that I am asking the children to do while they're in the classroom and while they're in the school, I am doing from the second I enter this building until the second I leave it. So if I'm asking the children to walk, I need to walk. If I'm asking the children to carry one thing at a time, I am carrying one thing at a time. If I ask the children to sit while they eat and drink, I'm not standing at the counter taking a sip of coffee. I need to be doing what I ask the children to do. And you will always notice if you have accidentally taken a shortcut. For example, there was one year I was tidying up and I picked up a rug and I rolled it down my body instead of getting down on the floor and rolling it across the floor. And all of a sudden, all the students are standing up and rolling the rugs down. And what saved me maybe a couple of seconds of kneeling down took weeks to teach the children to roll the rugs properly. So I did not really save myself any time. So we need to be mindful of the fact that the children are imitating us and we want to present them with our best selves. And we want to continue our own learning. I think one of the reasons why I still love this job 26 years in and why I always will is because I am just as fascinated with the new things that I am learning as the children are. And so, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be things that connect with the classroom, but it can be. Each year I try, or each year or every couple of years, I try to bring something new into the classroom. The past couple of years, it has been sewing. And I'm so fascinated with the different stitches that you can do and the different projects that children are able to do. And I've been really, I've been very joyful about it. And so the children in my classroom are really enjoying that as well, as it rubs off. But outside of school, there are other things that I enjoy learning about. And we want to continue to be joyful learners, just as the children are. And sometimes there will be connections with the classroom. Sometimes something might pop up and you say, oh, I was just reading about that, or I was just watching a documentary on animals that, that live in the grasslands of Africa. And so I do know about that, or, and sometimes it has nothing to do with the classroom, but that spirit of learning and that openness to learning, it becomes part of you, and the children can feel that as well. So we want to continue our own learning. We don't stagnate. And we maintain that sense of wonder. I get super excited when the little bean seeds sprout, when we put them on the windowsill, and when the butterflies start to emerge, I get just as excited as the children. And genuinely, because again, they can see all that, they can see it if it's fake. And I allow myself to participate in that joy, in that wonder with them. And I encourage you to do the same, because it makes a big difference in the classroom. So those are the things we expect of all adults that come into a Montessori classroom: the teachers, the assistant teachers, administration, student teachers, substitute teachers, of everyone. All right, the typical role of a lead teacher. So a lead teacher for this purpose is someone who has been through training and is running the classroom, has the experience and the training to be able to run the classroom. So they are responsible for observing children. That is an important part of a lead teacher's job and responsibility, is to be observing, so that you know what lessons to present, what materials are needed, where the children are going next, and so forth. The lead teacher is responsible for setting up classroom materials. So we prepare the environment for the children. We find the right tray, we find the right basket, we find, we think about what we've observed with the children and what needs to come out next, and we make it available, and we organize the classroom. And then we connect the children to the environment. So we set up the work, but that's not enough. If the child doesn't find it on their own, which they might not, we connect them. Oh, I'd like to give you a lesson. Or I put something out on the shelf that I think you would really enjoy. May I show you? And the child has the opportunity to say yes, but they also have the opportunity to say no. They may have something else in mind. They may be heading to the bathroom. They may be heading to snack. They may already have a work that they want to do, and we respect that. We don't force them. We would say something along the lines of, okay, that's fine. I would still like to show you this at some point. Maybe you can let me know when you're free, or that's fine. We can try tomorrow or this afternoon, but we want to let them know that we would still like to show them that work, but it's okay if it isn't right then. And the reason we don't push them into the work that we are choosing is because if a child has an idea of something that they want to learn, and we push them in a different direction, they aren't going to be very focused on the work that we are showing them. And so we've lost that opportunity. We've also taught them not to listen to their own inner guide, and we have potentially lost a learning opportunity with the work that they were intending to do. So it's kind of a lose-lose all the way across. So if a child is not interested in coming to a work at that moment, we don't force them. I have had children who are never interested in coming for work, for lessons with me. And in that case, you have to be a little more creative at connecting the children to the environment. And that could involve doing the work near them, happily yourself. And they watch, they see, and then they might try it on their own. The trained teacher will maintain lesson plans for each child. These are individual lesson plans with ideas of things, materials that the child is ready for and will be interested in. They are living documents. They're not set in stone. It's not like a checklist that you have to get through before you can put anything else on it. These are ideas. And so we offer them to the child and we make notes on how it goes. And, you know, we modify them. We might put a different lesson down. We might make a note saying repeat lesson in a month if they weren't really drawn to it. So we adjust and make notes. I usually change out my lesson plans about every 3 weeks, because by then there's so many scribbles and notes and little added things to it that I need a fresh piece of paper. Typically there's, and this I have under the role of the lead teacher. If there are co-teaching teams, there are many different ways of dividing up who is speaking to parents. In my opinion, it is very helpful to have one voice speaking to parents. So, you know, and if you have a co-lead situation, perhaps you've divided up the children and you are the main contact for one group of parents and your co-lead is the main contact for the other. It doesn't mean that they can't talk to the other teacher, but so that, you know, it gives parents one person to go to that they feel knows their child really well and that you have learned how to communicate with effectively. So it is helpful to have one particular point person for each family to communicate with. And then the lead teacher would be collaborating with the other teachers in the classroom. So working together, if someone who is trained and certified is working with someone who is not, is trained but not yet certified as learning, then they would be supervising that internship, helping them to finish up their training, make sure that they are getting all their assignments, helping in any way. If you're working with someone that doesn't yet have training, you're starting to share, you know, they're starting to share information about Montessori philosophy, answering questions, having discussions. So there should be a lot of communication between teaching teams about Montessori in general, about the children in your class specifically, about how to meet their needs and how to stay true to that Montessori philosophy. And then the assistant teacher supports the other adults in the classroom. I'm sorry, it looks like when I edited this, I took something out by accident. The first one of this was also supposed to be observation. So I'm not sure if I edited it incorrectly or just deleted it altogether, but the main role of the assistant teacher or any adult in the classroom is to observe the children and to make sure that we know what they're doing, what they're interested in. To ask questions of and learn from other teachers, to make sure that you are learning as much about Montessori philosophy and about the children and about teaching strategies as you can. Assisting with preparing the classroom environment. And that can be tidying up after a classroom session. The children are responsible for putting things away at the end of a work cycle and at the end of the day, but there are going to be things that need to be tidied up or sanitized. There's going to be more that needs to be done than just the children can do. Also in helping to restock. And again, this is something the children can do, but you might need to help. Sharpening pencils, restocking paper, in practical life, more cotton balls or more polish or whatever is needed, making sure that everything that the children need for the following day is available. Possibly setting up new work if you are asked by the lead teachers in the classroom. Discussing specific jobs and tasks with the team. So I always find it's very helpful to know what jobs are needed to be done each day, each week, each month, so that you know the shelves need to be dusted every day, but they're wiped down once a week. Or, you know, how often do you wash the windows, or how often do the work rugs get brought home to be laundered, and so forth. So it's important to talk together as a team about the jobs and tasks in the classroom that need to be done and how often. Some teaching teams like to have specific jobs for each person so that they know what to work on when they come in. You know, Ashley and I have divided up some of those things, like she always does. She always sets up snack, and I always put the chairs down. And, you know, so we have certain things that we do every day. Other places just like to have the list, and you go down and you do jobs until everything is ready for the day, or everything is ready at the end of the day. Either one works as long as it's something that the whole team decides together. During the work cycle, a large part of an assistant teacher's role is to protect the working children from interruption and to protect teacher lessons from interruption. And Ashley, my teaching partner, does this beautifully. When I'm giving a lesson, if a child puts their hand on my shoulder, rather than having them stand and wait, which, as Susan said, waiting is important, but if I'm giving a longer lesson, they're going to be waiting for quite a while, longer than they probably can. And so what's going to happen is they're going to end up in my face talking to me, or, you know, and they're not going to be successful. And so Ashley will come over and touch their shoulder and say, I see that Jenn's giving a lesson. May I help you with something? So she's protecting the lesson from being interrupted, but also she's making sure that the child is served. You know, we teach children how to observe someone else who's working. Observing another child is done without talking or touching that child's work. If a child is having difficulty observing and wants to involve themselves in the work and wants to touch things, the assistant teacher can go over and guide them away and help bring them to a work that they've had a lesson in and that they can be practicing, or bring them over to a group activity, or, you know, bring them to a shelf to choose something. So they can guide them away from disturbing others and help them find productive work somewhere. Again, guiding children to appropriate work if needed. We don't always bring every non-working child immediately to a work. However, sometimes you can see when a child is having difficulty making a choice, and then a teacher can step in and help, and can bring them, you know, ask them if they want to do a sensorial work or a practical life work, help them narrow their focus to the point where they can make a choice. But if a child has just put a work away, they might need a minute to decide what they're doing, and they may be in that process and don't need help. So we do wait a bit, and we give them a chance to re-engage with a different work before we swoop in and guide them somewhere. So there's a fine line between, and we have to watch for that moment where you see they are a little lost. They are not able to find that work on their own, and that's when we step in. And so you might see a little bit of wandering and looking at different things. They might pick something up off a shelf and then put it back and then go on to another shelf. If they're not disturbing others and they don't look lost, you can give them that time. It's when they are interrupting other people, or when they look like they just really don't know what to do, or you see frustration building, then we step in and guide them to a work if they need it. We need to be aware of the expectations in the classroom. So it's important that we know how many children can be at a work. Some classrooms, no more than 2 can be at a rug. Some classrooms, it can be 3 or 4. Sometimes, you know, certain works are only for 1 person. Sometimes a work can be for more. So we need to know what the expectations are for the classroom to be able to be consistent with them for the children. We assist with classroom management, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which guiding behaviors, discipline, and so forth. Okay, I want to make a note about praise. So, and I can't see all of you. I wonder if there's a way I can do that. I can kind of see all of you. Can you do me a favor, and can you raise your hand if you have heard at some point in your life that Montessorians do not praise? Has anyone heard that? Okay, a couple of you. All right, so it's true in a way. And the way that so what we're talking about when we say that Montessorians do not praise is that empty, good boy, good girl, great job kind of comment that is often made to children. You know, I've got several of them right here. Good work, wow, fantastic, brilliant, well done. When we talk to children in this way, when we do a number of things. One thing we do is we can often create praise junkies, I call them sometimes, children that must receive praise before they can move on. And that's the child that will bring in the picture. Do you like my picture? Do you like my picture? And they cannot exist without you saying, yes, it's a beautiful picture. Or, you know, the child who has to show everybody their new dress or their new shoes or their new backpack or lunchbox, and they have to have people tell them how much they like them. Children get addicted to this kind of feedback, and it isn't really beneficial. And here's why. When we tell a child good work or good job, we're not giving them any specific information. And while it feels good, there isn't anything really attached to it. And so the child doesn't necessarily know why they're receiving this praise. They like the praise, but they're not really sure what they're receiving it for. And so they're not really likely to repeat the behavior, which is kind of the point of, you know, which is kind of the point of the person who is talking to them and offering that praise, is that they want the behavior repeated. What Montessorians do is we notice, we recognize, and we validate what's going on for the child, because we want their motivation to be internal and not external. So praise is external reward. It puts all the power on the outside, on the adult or the person who is providing the praise. It doesn't give any power to the child. And we want that power of feeling good about what you've done to reside within the child and not be dependent on the adult. So the way that we do that is we turn it around. We help the child to recognize and understand the value of what they're doing for themselves. So I do a lot of noticing. So if a child who typically, you know, moves very quickly through the classroom and bumps into things and that kind of thing, if that child is working really hard at controlling their body and moving through the room, and I see that effort, I'm going to notice it. And I'm going to say to that child, you know, I notice how hard you're working at moving slowly and carefully through the room. That's it. There's no good job at the end of it. Just, I am noticing. I am noticing, you know, for a child that has done an artwork and is bringing me their picture, you know, I might say, I notice a lot of red in your picture, or I notice that you used a lot of different colors. And I might ask, would you like to tell me about your picture? Or what's your favorite part of your picture? I notice when children do things to help each other, and sometimes I'll thank them. You know, I noticed that you pushed in all the chairs in the room. Thank you for keeping our classroom walkways open and safe. We want to tell children that we see them. And we want to let them know the things that they do that help the community, that help themselves. We want to focus on effort and growth, you know, and development for children. We also don't want to make it so that, you know, if a child is good one day, if they can be good about something, you know, what will happen if they're not, if they don't do that the next day? Are they bad? Are we going to get upset with them? We want to take all of that confusion and question away. So we want to be noticing, you know, I saw you working on the movable alphabet, and I saw you really, really struggling with a couple of the words, but you didn't give up. I bet that felt really good to finish. So helping them to start having that self-talk of internal motivation, of internal strength, internal courage, that we want them to have. And trying to work away from that good job, high five, all of that kind of thing. And it's a big shift for a lot of people. And if it is something that you're used to doing, you're going to slip. And that's okay, as long as you notice it. And, I don't make a big deal of it, but you just, the next time you try something else, you can talk to your colleagues, what do you say when, somebody has a new dress on, or what do you say when someone brings you a picture? Get some ideas from other people, particularly those that have been in Montessori for a while. How do they communicate with the children in a way that validates what's going on, that helps the child to feel good about themselves, but is not giving all that power to the outside, to the adult instead of the child.
Can I just add a little something there, Jen?
Absolutely.
One thing we've really been trying to do this past few years too is to become more cognizant of gendering things, of think about how we comment on girls or boys, or assigning gender to boys and girls too, based on a number of factors. And I think it has a lot to do with the way that the way I was raised. So I think just being a little bit more aware of that. And a lot of times when we're trying to find something to say to someone, like, oh, what a pretty dress, or you look so pretty today. And that's something that we do want to avoid, not because we don't want to take joy in, we want to find things in common to talk about. I think that's why we do it. But I think focusing on something else besides looks are a really great thing, and especially for girls, because I think that we're kind of socialized as girls and women to value that about ourselves. And so I think it can become not something that we're intending, but it can perpetuate a stereotype that we want to try to avoid.
Yep, absolutely. Well said. Okay. And so it is a tricky thing, because it's something that we're, as I get farther and farther in my career, I'm noticing newer teachers doing it less and less, I think, because more and more it's going away in the early childhood and elementary schools when new teachers are going through. And so it's happening less, but it's a hard one. And it's something that you also are going to have conversations with parents about. And parent education, that's a huge parent education topic for how to really talk to their child. Because again, they kind of grew up in that as well. And it's probably a big part of their conversations with their children. And it can be very eye-opening for them to hear other ways of communicating with their child about things. It can be a really fun topic for a parent ed night. And it's very worthwhile too, to give the children that opportunity to have that kind of validation at home, as opposed to the praise, as well as at school. Okay. So classroom management is a large part of everybody's day, because, that's what we're doing. We're working with the children. We're spending our days with them, and we want to help guide their behaviors. There's a big difference between discipline and punishment. Punishment is often meant to humiliate or, make someone feel awful about their behavior. And discipline is not the same thing. So discipline is helping children learn how to regulate and how to control their bodies in an environment, or in how to exist in a community, basically. When a child is having difficulty, a Montessorian looks first at the environment, then they look at themselves, the adults, and then we look at the child. So it's the reverse of what has often been the way of focusing on misbehavior. When I did my traditional education training, it was, here's the child and what's wrong with them. And in a lot of cases, misbehaviors can be adjusted if you look at the environment or at yourself first. So for example, in the environment, one of my first classrooms, the children were running loops like a racetrack around the classroom. And when I looked at the environment, I saw that the way I had set up the shelves made a racetrack. So of course they were going to run around in circles. And so that was a very easy fix. I just moved a couple of shelves so that it was much harder to do that. And without even saying a word to the children, the behavior stopped. It is not always that easy, but that is one example of how the environment can be creating a problem. So if there's not, a couple of other examples, if there's not enough space for children to really lay out a big work like the 45 layout or the pink tower and brown stair, and so they're kind of bumping into each other and that kind of thing, and there's arguments going on because there just isn't space, that's something that can be rectified by adjusting the environment. So first, we look at the environment, we look at, is there anything in this environment that's causing the behaviors that we want to stop? If that's not the case, then we look at ourselves. So especially in the early years of my classroom, whenever the children were particularly loud, it was because I was loud. I have a louder voice, I have a louder personality. And so I was forgetting to model for them how I wanted them to be in the classroom. So rather than shushing them or no to them, I had to change my behavior before I could expect them to bring their voices down. And when I did, again, without really having to say much to the children or anything really, they brought their voices down too, and they slowed down their movements. If we are being, if I'm in a classroom and I hear an older child speaking sharply to a younger child, that's something I would want to look at the adult interactions. What is the head teacher or lead teacher to assistant interactions like? What are the adult to student interactions like? Is there something that the children are hearing in tone that someone in authority is not recognizing that they're passing on to the children? So we look first at the environment, then we look at ourselves, and we see, is there anything that we are doing or any way that we can rearrange the environment to stop this behavior? If not, then we look at the child. And we remember that misbehavior from children often, if not always, stems from an unmet need. Sometimes it's a habit that they've gotten into because of how they've been, because of a previous classroom or how they interact at home, but more often than not, it stems from an unmet need. And if we can figure out what that child needs, we can stop the misbehavior. So we use observation, again, to determine the children's needs. This observation is not judgmental. It's completely objective. And I have an example I'll go to in a minute. But we're looking for what happens before this behavior. Are there specific children that are always present or often present? Is the child demonstrating this misbehavior in a particular location every time it's happening? Is there a consistent time of day or day of the week? So we gather as much information as we can to figure out what is the need that's not being met. And that objective, non-judgmental is critical. We are putting down exactly what we see. And I have an example here that I wanted to go over. So subjective versus subjective versus objective observation note. So this is a very subjective observation note. And I used initials because typically when I'm taking notes, I'll use children's initials. So it says, B is interested in the work that R is doing, color matching. So B sits next to R. R is happy to see B and says hello. B wants to join the work and picks up the red color tablet. R doesn't like that and grabs it out of B's hand. B picks up the blue color tablet and throws it because she is frustrated. So the teacher who is writing this, the adult writing this, is putting a lot into this note that they don't really know. B is interested in the work that R is doing. We don't know that. R is happy to see B. We don't know that either. B wants to join the work. We don't know that. R doesn't like that, et cetera, et cetera. So here is an example of an objective, same situation, but objective observation note. B walks over to R's work rug and sits down next to R. R says hello. B picks up the red color tablet. R takes the red tablet out of B's hand. B picks up the blue color tablet and throws it. Okay, so the situation is the same, but the objective is non-judgmental. So we're not deciding how the children feel or their reasons behind anything, because we want to keep that open. We don't know yet what the reasons are. We don't know the motivation behind these behaviors. And we need to take notes over a period of time to really be able to gather information. But we can't put words or thoughts or emotions or reasons into these observations because we don't know what's going on in the children's heads. So that's just a brief example of the difference. Okay, so going back to classroom management, and looking at a child that is showing misbehavior and an unmet need, we need to remember that the child needs our assistance. When a child is misbehaving or using inappropriate behavior, it can be very frustrating for the adult, particularly if you're not sure what to do to help them. It's really important to remember that the child is not behaving this way because they want to frustrate us. They're asking for help, and it's our job to figure out the puzzle of how to help them. So we have to remind ourselves and remember that the child needs our assistance. We document the difficult behavior, again, using very objective terms so that we can gather information and figure out how we're going to move forward. Without that data, without that information, it's going to be really hard to figure out what the child needs and to get them the help that they need. Oh, and back for just a minute. Also remembering when we talk about the child not wanting to frustrate us. Although it is difficult, it's important to make sure that every time a child walks into the classroom, they get a fresh start every day. If a child walks into the classroom and we have the attitude that they're going to misbehave or they're going to do something that's going to frustrate us, they will feel that, and it doesn't give them the opportunity for that to be the day that they change. So every day we expect the best. And we give them that opportunity to make that fresh start, just like we would want. And it can be frustrating and it can be difficult. There are times that I've had to, I've gone to Ashley and I've said, because I've reached a point where I am frustrated, and I will say, I need you to go over and ask this particular group of children to quiet down because I am not able to be nice any longer. And I know that I'm not going to be. And so then Ashley takes over, or Ashley will say to me, can you walk the children down to such and such a special, I need 5 minutes, or, can you go talk to this child because I'm not going to be nice, or, we communicate with each other when we've reached a point that we recognize that we're not going to be able to give the child everything that they deserve from us because of our own frustrations. And we take those breaks, and that's okay, because you are going to have those moments, but it isn't fair to the child to put those moments on the child. Okay. With inappropriate behavior or misbehavior, we are going to have we're going to be much more effective if we can prevent misbehavior before it happens than we will if we're always just reacting to behavior as it happens. So there are a number of things that you can do to prevent misbehavior, and I've got several of them listed here. To start the classroom school year off with ground rules, and they can be very, very simple. They certainly at the toddler level and children's house level. I think at the infant level, having written rules might be a bit much, but to have the children understand, you can still talk to children about what's acceptable in the classroom. But something very simple like be kind, be gentle, be safe is what we use in our classroom. There isn't really any behavior that I have found that doesn't fall under one or maybe more than one of those categories. So we can say to a child, we walk in the classroom so that we are safe. That is part of the be safe rule. You know, we are careful with our materials because we want them to last a long time. That is part of the be gentle rule. And so we talk about what that means with the children right at the beginning of the year so that they're aware of it. And we talk about it often. It's not something that you talk about in September and then never again. Children need reminders and repetition. Often schools will have each class they write, be kind, be gentle, be safe, and the children sign it in some way. Older children might write their name, younger children might put a thumbprint on, but it's a covenant, a contract between everyone in the community that we are going to do our best to follow these rules. The adults want to be alert and aware of everything that's going on in the classroom. You want to make sure you don't have tunnel vision and you're working so closely with one child or with one task that you're not aware of what's going on in the classroom, so that you can, if things start to build up, you want to be aware of it before it reaches a critical point, and so that you can hopefully stop or calm things down before it gets too much. We can use our presence to influence behavior. Oftentimes just sitting next to or in the same part of the classroom as a group of children that are having maybe the beginnings of an argument is enough for them to remember that they really want to work this out for themselves and not have us interfere. And so, you know, they start to use kinder words to each other, or they start to really try to negotiate. We can use verbal reminders of the rules. Again, if we've got that at the beginning of the year, be kind, be gentle, be safe, we can go over that with children. When we are guiding children, we want to do it privately and quietly. We don't want to be making it obvious to everyone what's going on. That can be humiliating for children. Even at circle time, Ashley and I try very hard to avoid having me, if I'm leading circle, do any sort of discipline, because then everyone at circle now has their attention on that child. And that can be overwhelming. It can cause a child to continue that behavior just because now they're embarrassed, or it can just humiliate them, embarrass them. It's just not a good thing. So Ashley will kind of, you know, move very quietly over and whisper in a child's ear or pull them over to a private spot to have a conversation, rather than me stopping circle to comment on something. If at all possible. If it's a safety issue, obviously we do have to stop right away. But if it's something that is more of an annoyance or something that you have some time to fix it, we try to do that more quietly and privately. We also can wait to intervene if children seem to be working things out. We don't have to step in if children don't need us. They, particularly, and this less so for toddlers, they really do need someone helping them to negotiate most of the time, or at least their presence. But at the 3, 4, and 5-year-old levels, children have had, if they've had opportunities to work on these negotiation skills, they have some ideas of how they might want to solve the problem. And as long as everyone in the group is satisfied with the answer and nobody is feeling like they've been railroaded, or, you know, their feelings haven't been considered, you can allow whatever resolution they've come to stay. But if you do notice that someone is being taken advantage of, you might want to step in and say, that doesn't really sound fair to Ashley. Let's make sure that Ashley is okay with this, and continue the conversation. And then if one teacher is involved in disciplining a child, it's important that the other adults in the room kind of help keep that private. So monitoring the rest of the class, keeping other children from wandering over, making sure that we respect that child's privacy while they're having that interaction with another adult. So those are some preventative ways. And then things do happen, and sometimes we need to react to inappropriate behavior. And I put this quote here that I love: "You can't teach children to behave better by making them feel worse." And that's something I feel like I have got very well in the classroom, but I need practice at home with my teenagers. So sometimes I feel like that needs to be written on like the bathroom wall or something to remind me every day. When children feel better, they behave better. So scolding or making a child feel small or unimportant is not going to help them to behave better. So we want to be unemotional. We talked about starting fresh every day. being mindful of their self-confidence. I talked a little bit about discipline versus punishment. We're not trying to humiliate or hurt the child and make them feel bad. We want to guide their behaviors. We can connect the child back to materials. Often going back to work is a great way for the child to reconnect themselves and kind of regulate. And if necessary, we can limit the child's freedom. So if a child is having difficulty working with a particular friend or in a part of the room, we can bring them closer to us. We can ask them to work at a specific table or with something nearer to us. So we're limiting their freedom not as a punishment, but as a way to help them get back on track. All right. And a couple of very last tips, because I know we've just hit 4 o'clock. Distraction is great for bringing children, you know, who are starting to kind of veer off, distracting them with asking them to help with something. I use a lot of humor and I sing. Not well, but I sing a lot. So.
That was great. Thank you. It's a lot of information, everyone, right? But I think it really sets the year off or really in a wonderful way. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
All right. Thank you for joining me. I enjoy doing this kind of thing.
Well, it's great. Have a wonderful year, Jennifer, and
thank you.
come visit us again.
Yep. To all of you too, I hope you have a wonderful year and it's going to be a great year. It's always a great year.
And you have some handouts for us, don't you?
I do. I forgot to email them to you, but I will send them to you this evening. And you can pass them along.
If anybody,
All right.
you have a couple more minutes if people want to stay on to ask questions.
Yeah, I can stay for a bit if you need to. I understand that some of you may need to go, but I do have a couple of minutes. If anyone does have any questions that they want to stay and ask me, otherwise, you know, it was great having you with us today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was there. I have asked Marita to reach it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I see a hand for a question. I thought I did. Oh, it was just a goodbye.
Okay. All right.
All right. Well, thanks, Susan. I'll send those out to you tonight. I'm sorry I meant to do that this morning, but I did not.
Okay. Well, yeah,
All
I'm
right.
sure it's exhausting. Thanks for squeezing us in. I know that it's a lot this week to do it, but
It was great though. I needed this today too. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful year.
all right. We'll
All right.
try.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.